Welcome back, painting friends. Let's paint a sunflower and watermelon still life in watercolor. Copy the pattern onto both sides of tracing paper, then position the paper right side up onto watercolor paper. Retrace over the lines to transfer the pattern. We're going to begin with the background, and we'll be using yellow light, a yellow ochre, some violet, and some pale orange. So you'll want to put those colors out into your palette and add a lot of water. You want a wash of each one of those colors. We're going to be using very thin paint just for washes in this initial color layer. So once you have your colors mixed to a really thin, washy consistency, turn the paper around and use a 1-inch flat brush to brush the entire background or upper background area with water. So go around the edge of the watermelon, go around the edges of the sunflower, and down just into the base of the watermelon. Once your paper is sufficiently moist, begin adding color. Use the yellow light at the top of the watermelon edge and brush it down along the back of the watermelon. We can add a little bit of red to that lower side of the watermelon just to warm it up a little bit and transition it into the background. Your paper is really wet right now, so the colors are going to fade as the paper dries. The violet color is going to go behind the sunflower. Once again, don't worry about getting the color too deep because it is going to fade out, and we can always add more color later on after this dries. And once your color is on, just take a little extra color in your brush and just spatter some wet paint into your background. Put some violet spatters into the yellow and some yellow spatters into the violet, and just let's see what the paper does. You can always switch to a pointed brush if you can't get enough paint out of that wash brush there. Banging it against your finger or against the handle of another brush will help. let the background dry before beginning to moisten the watermelon area. So we'll moisten the watermelon with a tinted wash, a pink color, just a lot of water with a tiny bit of red. And I use a larger round brush for this step. The round brush, the belly of the brush holds a lot of water, and we're going to use the side of the brush or the belly of the brush to carry the water onto the paper. What we're creating is a graded wash that is going to disappear along the bottom edge, along the watermelon rind. So we want to keep our color, our red color, up near the top edge of the watermelon. Gradually pick up more red and get a little bit deeper color, more saturated color along the top edge. Just keep bringing more pigment down into your wash and apply that along the top edge into the moistened paper, and watch what the water does. You can see that it's pulling that color out. We can add a little bit of warmth as the color transitions over toward the sunflower. You can have a little bit of yellow in with your red color. And we want the color to fade away and disappear before it gets too close to the edge of the sunflower. Remember, as long as your paper is wet, you can continue to lightly manipulate the pigment and add more color, and the paint will continue to spread. It'll help if you tilt the pad up a little bit and let gravity have its way, pulling the color downward. Use the point of your brush to get along the edge, and it can be a little rough, just to add character to the top edge of that watermelon. Now we're going to add quite a bit of color. We're going to continue adding a little more red in here. Remember, watercolors dry lighter than they appear to be when they're wet. So this is really going to wash out. You'll be surprised at how much lighter this will be once it dries. Once you've got enough color on, we're going to charge that deepest color with some drops of water to push the color back and add even more texture to the watermelon and make it look shiny and juicy and wet. And if your color spreads a little too far downward and gets too close to the edge of the watermelon rind, you can just take some clean water on your brush and push that back. and finish up with a few more drops of water and some little tails waving down just to give direction and character. As long as your paper is wet, you can continue to play. When your paper starts to dry, it's time to stop. Next, we'll lay in the initial color washes on the watermelon rind and the leaf and stem of the sunflower, as well as the sunflower itself. We're going to make just a pale green wash, a yellow green, using some yellow light and a touch of blue, or if you have some sap green, you can thin down some sap green. And on the sunflower, we'll use our pale yellow and a large round brush, and we're going to just casually pull that yellow out from the center outward using the side of the brush, not really creating petals, but just using the side of the brush to pull some yellow out. If your background is a little wet and some of the color bleeds out, that's very effective. That's going to be very nice. We'll add more color as the paper begins to dry. And you can strengthen the yellow color, adding a little stronger pigment of the yellow light. You can even pick up a little bit of yellow deep into your brush to give it just a little darker hue, a little darker value around the center, right at the base of the petals. And then the center itself, you'll brush with a wash of burnt sienna. Where the paper is dry, meets a dry edge, you'll have a sharp edge, and where it meets a little bit of wet, the colors will bleed out a little bit, and that's very effective. Now let's work the foreground. We'll go back to our 1-inch wash brush and pre-moisten the entire area with some clean water. We're going to be using our yellows. We're going to use some violet, a bit of red, and some burnt sienna. We want lots of character down here at the bottom, and we're going to begin with very loose paint. So I'm picking up the pigment on the corner of my wash brush and just pulling some color out in order to get contrast around certain edges. I'm starting with green under the sunflower and right in the place where the sunflower and watermelon meet there. Once again, you can use sap green, or you can create any green mixture from your yellow and a blue on your palette. We'll deepen that by picking up some violet. Violet is a cool color. We're working in shadow. Now you want your paint to be very, very thin especially along the bottom edge. We want that bottom edge to fade away and even look drippy, very watery. I like to switch back to a round brush to get into the little details, the little corners, and use the side of my brush to carry some pigment onto the surface. It's also good to work horizontally to anchor those elements onto the page and let the paint just drip downward as you add more pigment. We can even add a little red reflective color. Can look a little shocking at first, but it will fade out, and you can always lift it out if it's a bit too intense. Clean water, a blotted brush, the side of your brush, and you can lift paint right off of the paper. It's good to work all around your painting, to work holistically, giving some layers an opportunity to dry while you work on some of the details, just to build up color in different places. Here you can see I'm adding a little more color, a little more burnt sienna to the center, because that's going to be a really strong center of interest. I can begin even adding some details with the point of my brush to get that seed texture there at the center of the sunflower. A little highlight. And now we'll start pulling some actual petals out with the point of the brush. Load with a little stronger yellow. They can come from the inside out or from the outside in. Just place your brush and let the brush do the work. Where the paper is wet, your color will spread. once you've worked enough color into the flower petals, you can deepen the center with more burnt sienna and then darken it with a mixture of burnt sienna plus cobalt blue, and that will give you a very dark brown, a warm color like burnt umber. And we'll pull just using the tip of our brush with a very light touch and start to pull some directional lines out onto the petals, just using the leftover paint from the center, just pulling a little bit out. Light touch with just the point of your brush. You can always switch to a finer brush. And then we'll start to accent some of the actual petal shapes to separate and define some of the layers of petals. Very subtle. Now that little petal that is flipped up, we're going to shade under the curve and just be very careful going around it. Now let's deepen the color on the watermelon rind and start to get some detail there. Stronger green. Using the point of your brush and carefully work around the edges of the flower. The flower has little serrated edges, little rough edges, so we are actually placing color in the negative space behind the leaf. We'll gradually get a little darker and literally scrub or scribble the paint onto the paper to leave some light spaces and some dark pattern. And we'll let the paint fade away. We'll get a lot lighter and less saturation as we move up into the point of the watermelon. That's going away from our center of interest, so that is going to be very light and faded away. And our deepest color will be at the base of the watermelon and right here behind the stem of the sunflower. Contrast. Our greatest contrast is always at our center of interest. So that's going to be right in the transition between the watermelon and the sunflower. Use the side of your brush, and we're going to gradually add more color into the foreground each time we have paint on our brush. Let's add the final values to the red of the watermelon, and we're going to once again moisten lightly the entire area and then just drop in some deeper color near the top edge if that's necessary. So you have to judge, you be the judge of how much more color you might need in order to strengthen and give life to that luscious, wet, drippy piece of fruit that you're creating. Let it fade away at the edge of the sunflower and as you work down into the edge of the watermelon rind. Now you can see also that I've also added a little yellow green to the leaf and to the stem, and then inside the little sections of the leaf. We're looking at the underside or the back side of the leaf here, so that's a little bit deeper, and I've left the veins light so it's in reverse on the back side of the leaf. And on the stem, I just wanted a warm green with a little bit of shading that is on the underside of the curve. I spent a lot of time gradually adding my reds here, but that is really just a matter of individuality. If you need more color, you want a lot more bright color, you can continue to add more pigment and more intensity as long as your paper is wet. And we're going to drop some water drops into this next layer of paint also to push all of this back, so it will reveal those lighter colors, those lighter values that were in your first layer once we add the water drops. Once again, just avoid getting color down near the edge, because we're going to add a little bit of warmth along that rind to merge the color in. So now let's intensify the foreground. The color has faded out a little bit, so we will re-moisten it and then drop in some stronger pigment. If your red has faded away, we'll add a little red wash, very thin, and then we'll go into some burnt sienna under the edge of the leaf. And let it fade away horizontally. And we'll continue to just manipulate, add more color, warm up that little bit of sunshine, and you can see the character that we're building there in the foreground. A little reflective color. And keep the edge really light on the underside of the stem, and we'll put a little more warm color behind the edge of the watermelon there. We'll add some yellow ochre. And you can tilt your paper, you can tilt your surface so that the water will spread. Add a few drops of water back there also. Don't want that to be really bright, just subtle. And we'll have more intense color, once again, right under the watermelon and where the watermelon and the sunflower intersect. Charge it with some water and then deepen in the deepest shadow. We'll need to be sure that the paper is dry before we add small green leaves peeking out from behind the sunflower. Just use the point of your brush to quickly place a few of those little green petals. Add some little dark green into the negative spaces at the base of the petals to separate them. And remember to move your strokes in the direction of the petals so that your perspective remains consistent. Now let's complete the inside fold of the leaf with some yellow green, and pay close attention to those little serrated edges around the edge of the fold and along the outside edge. We're looking for contrast, bright against dull, light against dark, and warm against cool. We'll fill in with a little light green, a yellow green, and gradually add a little more blue to make our green darker and cooler along the serrated edge. And we want to be working wet into wet here. We can actually bring back some of those little points and get some really sharp definition right along this edge. Our painting needs variety in all aspects. So not only do we need the loose edges or the wet edges, the lost edges, but we need some tight, refined edges as well, especially right near the center of interest and directing our eye around the painting. We can deepen the shadow of the stem behind the leaf. Once again, to add contrast and depth of color. And while it's wet, just pull a few little shaggy hairs out from the stem that is characteristic of sunflower stems. And don't forget a little bit of a shadow line underneath the stem of the leaf as well. Our watermelon seeds are a dark red. You can use a burnt umber, or we can use our complements on our palette, which would be our red and our green mixed together. The darker the red and the darker the green, the deeper your color is going to be. We'll just use the point of our brush to put those little seeds in with 2 tiny strokes, leaving a little space in the middle for a highlight. And you can always switch to a tiny brush. Now let's just put a little pale yellow-green, very pale yellow-green, a wash along the edge of the watermelon rind, just to make a nice transition and soften that hard edge. Lay the stroke in and then soften the edge with the point of your damp brush. The details in our leaves are just placed very loosely and casually with a dark green. I'll even add one under here in the shade. The deepest shadows, the highest contrast, right under that edge. And we have less contrast. The colors fade out all along the outside edges of our painting. Well, we have worked lots of luscious color layers into our painting this morning, and we're going to finish with some final color glazes and spatters. As long as you allow your paper to dry in between layers, you can continue to add layers to get as much intensity as you desire. Here I'm warming up the foreground in places, adding a little yellow to counterbalance the yellow of the sunflower in the foreground and along the backside, the underside of the melon. Some places it's bright, in other places it just fades away to a wash. Because the background is dry, we can always lift out color just with a clean brush. We'll glaze the center of the sunflower and brighten up a few of the petals, even adding a touch of orange here and there, especially on the lower left side and in the center to balance out the red of the watermelon. So we can put some red in the center of the sunflower. We can warm up the shadows. And we can lift out some white spaces or highlights in the flower petals as well, just by using a clean brush and clean water and just lifting and blotting some of the highlights out in places if it's necessary. This is your painting and you get to call all the shots. You get to be the judge. We want some final color, flecks of color, some final spatters. Here I'm tapping against the handle of the brush. And then I'll tap out some of those little spatters to soften them. If you want to control the area of your spatter, you can always lay a few torn paper towels to mask out any edges that you might want to preserve from getting too much paint spatter on. But any big spatters can be softened just with the point of your brush. And so, as you can see, I waited until everything dried, and then I added a little more violet to deepen the shadows, and added a few cast shadows underneath the leaves and petals that laid against the watermelon. So I do hope you enjoyed painting this wonderful watercolor still life with me today, and that you'll join me again soon. Visit LorayArt.com and my Patreon page. Thanks for painting with me. Bye for now.